Good evening, everyone. My name is Alida Nelson, and I'm the moderator and the chairperson for the Interfaith Forums. And I'd like to welcome you to our third and final forum for this year. It's our 33rd annual series, and we're so happy that you're with us to be among all of our speakers and our Zoom family and Facebook to hear the forum this evening on racism. Our program is one of many sponsored by the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada, all of which are dedicated to the eradication of prejudice, discrimination, and bias. Tonight, the program is 90 minutes. I'll give you a very brief introduction of the program and its purpose, and then our panelists will speak in consecutive order until about 8 o'clock, and then from 8 to 8:30, we'll entertain questions and answers. I'd like to thank everyone at this time for their involvement with the Interfaith Forums. It really is a community team sport. Our Interfaith Council and our Interfaith Forum Committee have selected the speakers and the topics for tonight. We want to say a special thank you to our Executive Director, Marvin Gowron, and to Eva Blackmere, who is our Administrative Director, and to Will Rucker, Pastor Will Rucker, who is a board member. And Eva and Will have been with us doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make this season possible. And of course, we thank all of our panelists and you, otherwise we would not have the forums. Our topic tonight is racism, how religions are addressing systemic racism, and we hope to hear some concrete actions, teachings of the faiths or the organizations that they are taking to assist members and or the public to be agents of change in identifying and confronting the challenges of systemic racism. And I'd like to give you just a very brief definition of systemic racism, and some of our panelists may expand on this in their presentations. Systemic racism is the formalization of practices within a society that puts one social or ethnic group in a better position to succeed, and at the same time disadvantages another group. It can be operational in education, employment, healthcare, and many other social systems. Now, I'd like to just very briefly introduce, so that they can wave to you, our panelists tonight, and I'll introduce them more broadly in a moment. First of all, we'll be hearing from Ms. Jolie Brislin, who is representing Judaism. Mr. Ken Larson will represent the Lutheran faith. Pastor Will Rucker will represent a Christian perspective. Imam Mujahid Ramadan will represent Islam. Ms. Mona Asadi will represent the Baha'i faith, and Mr. Rico Ocampo will represent a youth voice via his work that he does with youth and also from a Hispanic perspective. Now, the purpose of our forums are threefold. Basically, they're to hear the real teachings of different faiths so that you know what they truly say, as opposed to what we may hear in the public arena, which is oftentimes misinformation. It's also to meet people of different faiths and philosophical backgrounds, and to visit different houses of worship, which unfortunately those last two purposes we're not able to enjoy this year due to COVID, but we do want to see who's here. And so we're going to ask put up a poll to see which religions or points of view or philosophies are here tonight. It only gives us 10 applications, so we've taken the liberty of grouping some groups together, and we'd love you to participate. So the first one is ancient, and that includes indigenous to the United States, pagan, or Roma. Our next would be atheists, humanists, spiritual, not religious. The next one would be the Baha'i faith, followers of Baha'u'llah, Buddhists, followers of the Buddha, the Christian faiths, which are Christ-based, those would be Catholic, Orthodox, Protestants, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Then we have Hindu, followers of Krishna, Islam, followers of Muhammad, Judaism, followers of Abraham and Moses, the Sikh faith, followers of Guru Nanak, and then others, which would include multi-faith, Family Federation of World Peace, religious science, Christian science, Scientology, spiritualists, Unitarian Universalism, the Urantia book, and others. So there are a lot to choose from, and we hope you'll choose yours, and we'll find out who's here in just a moment. Our format, briefly, panelists have a total of 6 minutes tonight to share with you their point of view on the subject. I'm going to jump in at 5 minutes just to let them know they have another minute to follow, and that keeps everybody equal in the time that they're able to speak with us. They're going to speak in the order that they're on the flyer and that they've been introduced tonight. And in between the speakers, we have 2 polls. We're asking questions about your thinking and experiences related to racism. And following the speakers and the polling, we will have our question and answer period, and you can submit your questions at the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Your questions will be forwarded to Marvin, who'll then send them on to me. You have a better chance of having a question answered if it's directed to one person rather than to the whole group. So Eva, do we have our results on who's here? Okay. So from the ancient, indigenous, pagan, and Roma, we have 5%, atheists, 3%, Baha'i faith, 32%, Buddhists, 3%, Christian, Christ-based, 30%, Islam, 3%, Judaism, 18%, and 14% from others, representing a big tent of others. So we have a diverse crowd, and we're glad you're all with us. Ground rules are simple. We assume that our religious or philosophical beliefs are our most deeply held beliefs, so we're not attempting to proselytize or convert. We're here to learn, not to challenge or debate. We speak only for ourselves. We don't interpret another faith or belief. And if we come to disagree, we simply agree to disagree. And we always pray that we feel the spirit of the one who created us all as we share what we believe. At this time, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and representing Judaism this evening is Ms. Jolie Brislin. Jolie is the Nevada Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League. As the ADL, she implements and collaborates on programs focusing on anti-Semitism and civil rights, including anti-bias programs in the Nevada schools. She also collaborates with law enforcement and elected officials and community members to build bridges of communication and respect among diverse groups. In 2016 and 2019, Jolie co-led the Western States Counter-Terrorism Seminar in Israel with key Nevada and California law enforcement personnel. Jolie is the ADL representative on many community organizations, and her degree is in political science. Jolie.
Thanks, Alita. Well, like Alita said, I am here tonight representing the ADL, which is the leading anti-hate organization. We were founded in 1913 in response to the escalating climate of anti-Semitism and bigotry. And our timeless mission is to protect the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all. And ADL's mission and ultimate goal is a world in which no group or individual suffers from bias or discrimination or hate. So in order to understand how Judaism is addressing racism, we must remember the opposition, discrimination, slavery, and genocide that have plagued the Jews. But it is because of our history that we never stay quiet. When bigotry or hate rears its ugly head, we speak out, because speaking out against injustice is a fundamental value to Judaism. Anti-Semitism is the oldest form of hate. Since the beginning of time, Jews have been subjected to political, economical, and social discrimination, resulting in the deprivation of legal and civil rights. Jews were restricted from restricted to living in ghettos. And in the beginning of the 13th century, we were required to wear distinctive symbols such as badges or pointy hats so that we can immediately be recognized. This is an action that was to be revisited by the Nazis in the 20th century. In the Jewish tradition, equality is based on the concept that all God's children are created in the image of God, and that you shall have one law for the stranger and the citizen alike, for I am Adonai our God. What we teach that you should not stand idly by with the blood of your neighbor. And we empower people to lift up the world through acts of love and justice. In fact, do you know that 36 times in the Torah, it mentions to love the estranged? That is more than any other mitzvot commandments, and it's a fundamental part of Judaism. Our history teaches us that discrimination against any members of a community threatens the security of an entire community. Thus, many American Jews have historically supported a variety of civil rights issues, including equality for the LGBT community, hate crimes legislation, death penalty, criminal justice reform, disability rights, and legislative protections from religious discrimination in the workplace. American Jews have played a significant role in the founding of some of the most important civil rights organizations in our country, including the NAACP. In 1909, Jewish civil rights activist Henry Moskowitz joined other civil rights leaders to found the NAACP. And Kibbe Kaplan, a vice chairman of the Union of Reformed Judaism, served as the national president of the NAACP from 1966 to 1975. During the civil rights moments, Jewish activists represented a disproportionate number of whites involved in the struggle. Jews made up half of the young people who participated in the Mississippi Freedom Summer in 1964. Reformed Jewish leaders were arrested with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in Florida. And in 1964, after a challenge to racial segregation and public accommodations, most famously Rabbi Herschel and other prominent Jews marched arm in arm with Dr. Martin Luther King and in the March on Selma. Today, the Jewish community, and specifically the ADL, continues its support of civil rights laws, addressing persistent discrimination in voting, housing, and employment against all people and all marginalized communities, because it is what we're bound to do.
So Jolie, did you finish before I binged you?
I guess I did.
Okay, somebody else gets her minute then. Thank you so much, Jolie. I'd like to ask Eva if she could put up our first poll question. Okay, there'll be 4. Does your faith actively place a major focus on racial justice in scripture or holy text? Yes, no, or somewhat. Does your faith actively place a major focus on racial justice by actively creating diversity within the congregation? Yes, no, not sure. Would you say racism is one of the top 5 most important issues facing the United States? It's not multiple choice after all. Okay. And do you embrace the idea that whites in the United States enjoy easier access to housing, employment, educational opportunities, and healthcare than Blacks? Okay, so if you'll answer the questions and submit them, we'll see what everybody says in just a moment. And now it's my pleasure to welcome and ask to speak Mr. Ken Larson, who is representing the Lutheran faith. Ken is the spiritual director and board member with Christian Formation and Direction Ministries of Nevada. He is a Stephen minister with Community Lutheran Church in Las Vegas. Ken is the organizer and facilitator of the monthly contemplative workshop and is a board member of the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada. Ken has been a part of the anti-racism training through the Minnesota Church's Anti-Racism Initiative. Ken.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm a lay member of the whitest Protestant Christian denomination in the United States, the Lutheran Church. My congregation, Community Lutheran Church in Las Vegas, has over several thousand members and is affiliated with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, better called the ELCA. One way of describing the history of the Lutheran Church in America is as a Northern European immigrant church. In its history, as part of the formation of this nation as we know it, the Lutheran Church did not have a unified position on the enslavement of African Americans and the genocide of indigenous people. Similarly today, there is a lack of agreement in understanding and response to racism and white supremacy in today's church. But I see hopeful signs of inspired leadership to change from a culture that accommodates systemic racism and white supremacy. I'll provide some examples today of that work in the ELCA at national, regional, and local church levels. The place I began with is the ELC denomination in its recognition in 1990s as a time to confront its internal obstacles to doing justice in the world. A social statement was adopted in 1993 called Freed in Christ, Race, Ethnicity, and Culture. The statement outlines commitments, including organizational and leadership changes to promote multiculturalism and advocacy to eliminate global racial and ethnic discrimination. Moving into a new millennium, the ELCA recognized the reality of its history and has begun a transition to an anti-racist identity. The current ELCA website has a number of statements, resolutions, documents, and commitments on its racial justice ministries. Specific key commitments by the ELCA related to racism and white supremacy that I'll briefly identify have included repudiation of the doctrine of discovery, which resolves, quote, to repent from this church's complicity in the evils of colonialism in the Americas, which continue to harm tribal governments and individual tribal members, end quote. Another paper entitled Strategy Towards Authentic Diversity has the following statement. When we speak of racism and other forms of oppression as though they were only matters of personal attitude, we underestimate them. We have only begun to comprehend the complexity of the sin, which spreads like an infection through the entire social system. A third document, Condemnation of White Supremacy and Racist Rhetoric, resolves as follows: to call all congregations of the ELCA to engage in communal study of the structures and rhetoric that empower and fuel racism and white supremacy, and to take to heart the teachings of scriptures so we may all be better equipped to speak boldly about the equal dignity of all persons in the eyes of God. A fourth document is a declaration of the ELCA to people of African descent. On June 27, 2019, the ELC Church Council passed a resolution that calls on the ELCA to engage in anti-racism and racial justice work and to strive for economic justice, including study of reparations. Over the past year, I've participated in other social justice conversations in our denomination and our church. Two examples of regional levels of conversation that I've been involved in include a monthly ELCA coaches workshop on race, which focused on Black and Indigenous racism, and a monthly open conversation on race with Synod area church leaders. At our local church level with Community Lutheran Church this year, our youth director documented conversations with Black and Latinx teens and young adults who have a story to tell about racism and the experience with racism, and who found a connection at our church through her leadership. We've named the new ministry The Time for Justice, and will include ongoing focus around racism, white privilege, and anti-racism initiatives. My role in that leadership team has been to develop and facilitate a book and Bible study using a 10-week study entitled Uncovering Racism. Using Zoom, we started on August 19th with over 50 participants and ended 2 weeks ago with approximately 20 people. Our explorations were around the realities of racism in our personal relationships and our institutional systems, as well as unconscious bias and white privilege. As conversations grew deeper each week, we gained greater understandings and possibilities for change. Our leadership team is now developing a letter to the congregation that presents the insights from the study material and our shared perspectives, as well as recommendations that could help build a more anti-racist identity for Community Lutheran. I'm more optimistic now than I've ever been about a sustained movement in the Lutheran Church at national, regional, and local levels that leads to real and meaningful change.
Good job, Ken. That was perfect. And as a former Lutheran, I'm very inspired by what your church is doing.
Thank you.
A lot. Okay, Eva, do we have the results of our first poll questions? Okay, so 76% of us have religions where a racial focus, let me read that. Yes, 76% have a focus on racial justice in scriptures or holy text. No, 11%, somewhat 13%. Does your faith actively place a major focus on racial justice by actively creating diversity within the congregation? Yes, 69%. No, 13%. Not sure, 19%. Would you say racism is one of the top 5 most important issues facing the United States? 100%, but somehow one person did say no. Overwhelmingly, though, everyone says yes. Do you embrace the idea that whites in the United States enjoy easier access to housing, employment, educational opportunities, and healthcare than Blacks? 83% say yes, no, 10%, unsure, 7%. Okay, very interesting. Thank you so much for participating. And we will go on to our next speaker, who is Pastor Will Rucker, and who is also someone who's been helping us produce these Zoom programs for the last few weeks. Representing a Christian perspective, we welcome Pastor Will Rucker, who is the leader of the Intersection Spiritual Community in Las Vegas. Pastor Rucker is an author, activist, and teacher, and the host of the Compassionate Las Vegas podcast. Will is a board member of several organizations in Las Vegas, including the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada, the Minority Health and Equity Coalition, and Community Partners for Better Health. Will's degrees are in biblical studies and Christian ministry. Will.
Well, thank you, Alita, and good evening to each of you. Admittedly, this has never been an easy subject to address, especially in 6 minutes, but in the recent weeks, it has become even more difficult and complex. My church, the Intersection, was started as part of the evangelical Christian movement. For the majority of my ministry, I have been an evangelical Christian. What I have done to address racism, systemic racism as a pastor, spiritual leader, and compassionate human being is to radically change my theology. From top to bottom, inside and out, I have had to reconsider the things I was once so certain of. But leadership matters. Integrity matters. Character, it matters. Now, I was born into clashing realities, progressive in a Black American Christian home. My elementary school celebrated diversity, even asking me to lead a Kwanzaa assembly for the all-white school. My church taught about Jesus, but subliminally suggested that those of us in the suburbs were sellouts. When I was old enough to make my own decision about church, I went to the evangelical megachurch led by a fiery Black pastor, made that my home. The stage was the picture of diversity, different ages, Blacks, whites, Latinos, all singing together. And we even had ministers from different countries. When I joined the church, I was proving to myself and all the voices of my past that I was in fact good enough. The homophobic, conservative, right-wing, whitewashed, patriotic Christianity was veiled by a Black church experience. The Bible was taught with a diversity perspective in mind, and my denomination reinforced a message of conditional acceptance. Internalized racism is the chain that ties so many of my Black and brown brothers and sisters to the evangelical Christian world. To think that we, meaning Black people, are legitimately included and equally observed in the broader denomination is the same train of thought as the old slave debates over whose massa was better. The recent election and the 80% support for the incumbent was my wake-up call that my own denomination, including much of my own teaching, was actually reinforcing the invisible chains of systemic racism. While we preached freedom in Christ, we lived in submission to whites and to whiteness. Economics above equity is inherently a privileged position and deeply rooted in racism. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander says, in the era of colorblindness, it is no longer socially permissible to use race explicitly as a justification for discrimination, exclusion, and social contempt. So we don't. Rather than rely on race, we use our criminal justice system to label people of color as criminals and then engage in all the practices we supposedly left behind. We have not ended racial caste in America. We have merely redesigned it. In my last moments, I will share 5 things that we are doing to address systemic racism as a church. Number 1, we are acknowledging racism is not the central issue. Wealth inequality is. Wealth equal power, and until Black people have enough wealth to truly be independent, we will always be subject to oppression. 2, we're acknowledging that our scriptures do not have an explicit answer, but rather provides principles from which we may reason, such as love your neighbor as yourself. That's a clear indication of the imperative to dismantle all systems of oppression. Thirdly, we are focusing on forgiveness. Teaching forgiveness allows us to then teach about unity, restorative justice, and anti-racism, and other related subjects. Fourth is compassion work, forms like this, helping people to understand what racism is, that you can be a good person and be a racist too. Lastly, we are radically telling the truth. Truth is often uncomfortable, but we choose to tell it anyway. We do not use Karen as a derogatory term any more than we would use the N-word. True equality is our message, not just the adjusting of scales. So we are dismantling systemic racism by recognizing it. Racism is not a Black person's problem or a person of color's problem, it's humanity's problem. And we teach that all people should take it personally and do everything within their power to dismantle it. All isms, for they are all ultimately connected. Now, understand, I was born Black. I was Black before I was Christian. I will be Black when I die. I simply cannot separate my race from my identity. My family and friends have their own experiences of being Black, but all of our experiences are connected. For that reason, in a society that has mutilated, killed, raped, pillaged, and done everything but eliminate the Black race in this country, I am indebted until I die to make sure that we as a people are taken care of. So my faith, my hopes, my belief is that we will truly learn to love one another as we love ourselves. And I believe we will get there through unity, through compassion, through understanding and education. With that, I thank you and I conclude my time.
Thank you so much, Will. And you also came in right under the 6-minute spot. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. And Eva, we now have a second set of poll questions. Okay. In the past year, have you participated in any discussions about racism in America with people of different races? Have you ever invited a person of a different race to a small dinner gathering at your home? When voting, do you ever take race into consideration as a way that you can help to more equitably distribute power? And do you feel comfortable, or do you understand the meaning of and feel comfortable with the term white privilege? Okay, so this takes some heart-to-heart consideration when you answer these questions, and we look forward to seeing what everybody says. Thank you. Now we welcome Imam Mujahid Ramadan, who is representing Islam this evening. Mujahid is the Islamic prison chaplain at Clark County Detention Center. He is the founder and CEO of MR Consulting Incorporated, a full-service community relations and consulting agency. Mujahid is a student of the late Imam Warthuddin Muhammad. He is a longtime board member of the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada and co-chairs the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's Multicultural Advisory Council. Mujahid, take it away.
Thank you, Alita. I hope you can hear me. With the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, to our panelists, and I've enjoyed all of you, to our moderator, Alita. Thank you for the good work that you and all of those who worked to put this together have brought about, and to our listening audience for joining such an valuable and such a useful discussion as we're used to being engaged in Interfaith Council. Peace be unto you in the language of the Quran and Muslims. Assalamu alaikum. And this is very interesting subject matter during the time that we're in right now, which is a watershed moment in history, so to speak. Islam itself, the scripture we would like to use as the first initial backdrop, God tells us in the scripture of the Quran, and it's also demonstrated in the life of the prophet, which I will share shortly. But God tells us that he created us from one single human being, and from that human being made its mate, and from them made them into nations, tribes, and families that they may know one another. So God is saying our differences really in terms of what we call race, but where there's really is no such thing as race. We're all human beings. God gives us the direction and the guidance that reinforces the fact that our origin is one single human being and that our existence is as one human body. So it is outside of the norm of Islam for someone to be seen in a better or lesser light among Muslims, but also among others, including other faith traditions and other human beings who happen to be of a different ethnic population. Now, let me just say for a moment in terms of race, that there is really no such thing as a social concept. And there's no significant genetic variations within the human species to justify the division of race. From the year 1990 to the year 2000, President Bill Clinton convened a group of geneticists to study decoding the human book of life, a milestone in humanity. And one of the things they came to in 2000 at the press conference that President Clinton announced is that there's the most important fact of life on earth is that we're all just one common humanity. And that 99.9% of all human beings on the earth are alike. We are alike. So there really no such thing as race. And God affirms this in the Quran by saying your origin, your existence as human beings is as one, and your death and your resurrection is as one. So over and over it's emphasized. Now, not only in terms of race, when it comes to gender, and Islam certainly is an advocate for defending gender rights. It lets us know that there's no difference between the man and the woman. The differences are complementary, but there's no superiority there. So there's no superiority in religion within the religion, but there's no superiority outside of the religion either. There was one occasion during the life of Muhammad, the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he was with his companions, the Sahaba, and there was a funeral procession passed them by as they were in a marketplace. And the Prophet stood and gave due recognition to the funeral procession. And one of the companions said, "O Messenger of God, the funeral procession was for a Jew." And the Prophet said, "But wasn't he also a human being?" So the priority for us in Islam is the humanness of it all. In terms of racial privilege and racial discrimination, Islam has had a history of championing anti-racism. And something that we're doing within our community today is working to better educate the community itself in terms of what racism is. Islam, probably among many of the faith traditions, Abrahamic faith traditions and others included, includes a very, very diverse population. There's probably not a country in the world that doesn't have Muslims living in those countries. Of course, my experience as an African American in dealing with racism is uniquely different because I'm a descendant of slaves. I'm a descendant of those who experienced racism directly. I'm a descendant of those who experienced neo-racism or neo-slavery from 1865 to 1968. I'm a descendant of those who fought for civil rights and for voting rights. And so I have a dual perspective in terms of this issue around racism. And again, Islam as a faith tradition, one of the things that had been very inviting for myself—
5 minutes.
Time goes fast when you're having fun— is the fact that Islam represented itself without the religious stigma that we had found in the Western world in religion. And so we're promoting more interfaith dialogue within Islam with other faith traditions. We think that's important. And we're encouraging more and more people to understand what racism is systemically. It's not one thing, it's a whole host of things that other panelists have already talked about, and that it's a system that has to be addressed. And as Dr. Martin Luther King said, unaddressed, it could be the very destruction to the core of this country. That is the damaging effect of racism, and it's something that we at Interfaith Council believe that there has to be continued discussion here. But we have to be involved in that as individuals, and we have to really invite those who are Caucasian whites to become champions for anti-racism, because it's not so much Black people being the issue of racism. We're not racist. We don't have the power to be racist. And the best people to convey the fact of the damaging effect of racism to whites happens to be other whites. And we need for whites to join, and we encourage and promote and encourage for that to happen. But for the remainder of us to show love and compassion and consideration and understanding. We're one common humanity. And love and compassion will be the way that we can engage people and bring them closer. We can't force a person. We can't eradicate racism from a person's heart, but we can love that individual. And as Christ Jesus, alayhi salam, peace be upon him, said, it's easy to love the lovable. Who's going to love the unlovable? We're going to have to find a way to love the racists also and educate those individuals to that fact.
Thank you. Thank you, Mujahid, very much. Beautiful. Eva, do we have the results of our second poll? Okay. All right, 92% of us have had a discussion about race with people of different races. 8% have not. Have you ever invited a person of a different race to a small dinner gathering at your home? 86% have, 14% have not. When voting, do you ever take race into consideration as a way you can help to more equitably distribute power? 79% said yes. 21% said no. Do you feel you understand the meaning of and feel comfortable with the term white privilege? 86% say yes, 14% say no. Thank you all very much for participating. Those are interesting responses. We appreciate your involvement in that. Our next speaker is representing the Baha'i Faith, and that will be Ms. Mona Asadi. Mona is a junior at Chapman University, where she is pursuing degrees in vocal performance and music education, along with a minor in religious studies. Mona was valedictorian at the Las Vegas Academy of the Arts. She is currently president of the Chapman Society for Music Education and is working with the Conservatory's administration to create systemic change regarding diversity and equity and inclusion. She is the Baha'i representative on the Chapman Interfaith Council and has served on the university's Black Student Union Executive Board. She is also on the Baha'i Race Amity Task Force. Mona.
Thank you, Alita. One of the foremost defining characteristics of the Baha'i faith is the call towards the unity of humankind and the elimination of all forms of prejudice. In fact, the Baha'i faith believes that world peace is conditional on our ability to attain racial unity. Shoghi Effendi, the great-grandson of the Prophet founder Baha'u'llah, said that eliminating racial prejudice should be regarded as the most vital and challenging issue confronting the Baha'i community. This is what sets the Baha'i faith apart from so many others. Directly in our scripture, you can find acknowledgement of racial injustice and an urgency to be an animating force in its elimination. Since the beginning of the faith in America, Baha'is have set a precedent for doing just that. In his travels to America in 1912, Abdul-Baha, Baha'u'llah's son, repeatedly broke social and segregational norms by visiting and talking to students at historically Black universities, by insisting on welcoming all races into the same space for his many talks, and by repeatedly placing African American Baha'is in places of honor. During his travels, he also encouraged interracial marriage, and by doing so, the first Baha'i interracial marriage took place 2 years later in 1914. In 1921, Abdul-Baha encouraged American Baha'i Miss Agnes Parsons to plan America's first ever racial amity conference. And between 1921 and 1924, 4 race amity conferences were held, a historic achievement by the American Baha'is. As Shoghi Effendi once said, the Negro race has been and still is the victim of unjust prejudice, and it is obviously the duty of every Baha'i, Negro or white, to do all in their power to destroy the prejudices which exist on both sides. They can do this not only by exemplifying the true Baha'i spirit in all their associations and acts, but also by taking an active part in any progressive movements aimed at the betterment of the lot of those who are underprivileged. Although Baha'is are not to take part in divisive partisan politics, we are encouraged to stand up for what is right and to use our spiritual judgment when involving ourselves in social movements. Drawing upon this sentiment, the Baha'is later became one of the first religious organizations in America to desegregate, and Baha'is of all colors and origins were active in civil rights work throughout the 20th century. Even in the heightened racial climate of today, Baha'is have securely allied themselves with those calling for progressive change, those who are attempting to create a safer and more just society for our Black brothers and sisters. Even within our own Baha'i institutions, the minority is uplifted and honored. Within our own elections, Baha'i law states that if there is a tie between 2 people for the same position, priority should be given to the individual who is a member of the minority. Additionally, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, bestowed upon people of African origin the blessed title of the pupil of the eye. Surrounded by the white, the dark pupil of the eye serves as the point at which all light enters the eye and reflects what's before it. Without the pupil, sight is impossible. In this same way, Black people serve as the sight of this country and the conscience of the world. They are the people who reflect our reality back to us, calling this country to a higher standard of equality, morality, and justice. In the weeks and months since the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor's deaths, Baha'i communities all over the world have renewed their efforts towards the elimination of racial prejudice. In addition to our traditional outreach programs, community children's classes, and philanthropy, the Baha'is are currently busying themselves in the creation of new racial amity discussion groups, education series, and task forces. In fact, this summer, the Universal House of Justice, the supreme governing body of the international Baha'i community, wrote a letter directly to the American Baha'is on the topic of race. In this letter, the Universal House of Justice provided the Baha'is of the U.S. with direction and encouragement in the fight against racism, calling racism a profound deviation from the true standard of morality, and challenging us to remember the power of love in changing the world. Love originating from our relationship with the divine, love ablaze among members of a community, and love extended without restriction to every human being. Since its inception, the Baha'i Faith's history of inclusion, celebration of diversity, relevant and direct scripture, involvement in progressive movements, and emphasis on unity has set us apart as champions of change. Until racial amity is achieved in every respect and systematic racism eradicated from our institutions, I can guarantee you the Baha'is will not stop. As Baha'u'llah once said, the tabernacle of unity hath been raised. Regard ye not one another as strangers. Ye are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch. Thank you, and I give my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mona. That was a beautiful presentation. And now we'd like to hear our last speaker. We're pleased to introduce Mr. Rico Ocampo. Rico is an undocumented, documented community organizer and activist. He is engaged in local, statewide, and national platforms advancing advocacy and justice for homeless youth and immigrant communities. Rico has a reputation for his passionate anti-racism work and for amplifying youth voices. He is the youth and programs organizer for Make the Road Nevada, a nonprofit which is working with Latinx and working class communities of color. And Rico is the director of the wonderful Camp Anytown, Las Vegas. Rico.
Thank you, Alita. Greetings. We are here, gathered here today on the homeland of the Southern Paiute people, otherwise known as Las Vegas, Nevada. My name is Rico Ocampo Hernandez, director for the Anytown Las Vegas program, and today I am going to address you in the best way I know how. But first, I have to take this moment in because I'm remembering my mother letting me know as a young child when she prophesied over my life and declared that one day my voice was going to be used to influence young people all over the world. And so I'm eternally grateful for her. And I'm also eternally grateful for being able to share myself with all of you today. And I want to give honor where honor is due as well. I want to honor the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada and each panelist for being a part of this virtual event. I pray that you continue to thirst for an anti-racist society, a society that overflows with racial equity and justice. And I have the privilege of being the director for the longest running anti-racist youth program in the state of Nevada. And there's so much pride in me because I know how many people have sacrificed for me to be in this exact situation right now. And the beautiful thing when so many people sacrifice for you is that you have the power of so many people. I stand here as one, but I come as 10,000. Again, I stand here as one, but I come as 10,000. Maya Angelou said it best. I stand as one, but 10,000 support me. So every time I have the opportunity to use my voice, I am honored and humbled. So how are we dealing with racism in our community? 2 words: Camp Anytown. At Camp Anytown, students participate in workshops, discussion groups, and team building activities throughout a 4-day weekend and discuss issues such as race, ethnicity, gender, come on somebody, power, privilege, and religion. And students are challenged to look upon their cultural membership and belief systems and to assess how their interactions with others are colored by their developed perceptions. So what is the end result? We establish young people as leaders at an early age, despite their lack of educational or personal accolades. We empower young people to be at peace with their imperfections and brilliance. And we equip them with the tools to combat racism and other forms of discrimination in their community. And every year, 140 diverse students from various backgrounds graduate from our program and become immediate change agents. And as a result, they increase their tolerance, community service hours, return to volunteer for our program, and build anti-racist campaigns after graduating. Students have reported that as a result of attending Camp Anytown, they go on to register for the first time in their life to vote. They go on and increase their voting habits throughout their lifetime. And graduates go on to lead programs within our very own organization, and in fact become part of our youth council, also known as the AYC, which provides strategic direction to the Anytown program. It is my belief that if we want to create solutions to the systemic issues that have plagued our nation for decades, we must include young people in those conversations and acknowledge our own adultism. We must allow young people to lead and forgo your ego, invest in young people, mentor young people, and view them as your peers. We must also talk about racism as a moral issue and not a political one. I've said this countless times, and I'll say it again. Our country currently has a deep wound, a deep racist wound, and that wound has not been treated for decades. And as long as we continue to put Band-Aids on those wounds, minority and marginalized communities will be the ones to feel the unbearable pain and infection. And as an undocumented immigrant myself, I have seen what racist policies have done to my community. For example, usage of the word illegal, which has dehumanized my people. Once a particular group of people have been dehumanized, mistreating them is a much simpler affair. Thousands of sexual allegations against immigration and customs enforcements. No COVID assistance for us, even though we single-handedly support the nation's food infrastructure. Undocumented immigrants make up more than half of the agricultural workforce. And despite we're not seen as Americans, and despite that, we are still going up against these racist policies. We also know that with regards to separation of families, placing children in cages, and we as a nation have allowed these racist policies to happen. So dear faith community, prayer is not enough. It is needed, but it is not enough. We need you to roll up your sleeves, march in the streets with us. Don't wait for another family separation policy to happen, for an immigrant child to die at the hands of the government. March with us today and every single day. And what can you begin doing today? Get out and befriend someone who doesn't look like you. Go and meet a Latinx family. Go meet a Jewish family. Go meet a Black family. Start to get into other cultures besides your own. Support anti-racist organizations and youth programs. We need people to start writing checks to programs that are doing the work on the ground. Donate to historically Black colleges. Support political candidates that support anti-racist policies. Stop saying, I am not racist, and listen when someone calls you in. And if you own a company, identify if you have any blind spots within your hiring processes. Being anti-racist is like hygiene. It is something we need to look at as an everyday practice. No one said this was going to be easy. It is going to be uncomfortable. And if it isn't uncomfortable, you're in the wrong place. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Rico. At this point in a forum, I would ordinarily ask everybody to give our panelists a wonderful ovation, and I don't know what else to do except right now to say thank you to everyone. You were all fabulous, really wonderful. So we're going to start our first round of questions with Ken Larson, and the question will be asked of everyone. So Ken, this is the question. What is the basic fear lurking at the bottom of racism? You have a minute for this.
Speaking as someone who comes from a place of white privilege, I think I can identify that the fear is a loss of maybe relevancy within the culture that we as white men especially have known for all of our lives that go back quite a ways. And that fear of relevancy and that fear of identity loss, fear of power loss, is something that I find when talking to people about white privilege and white supremacy is really hard to engage because it's deep. It's rooted in something that's passed on from generation to generation. So I think as Rico was saying too, and others are saying, we need to sustain the process of representing anti-racism in all of our engagements and all of our environments.
Thank you, Ken. Same question. That goes to Will.
I think that Ken said it very, very well. It's the underlying fear of the lack of survival, to become extinct. The fear is really rooted in some very base instincts. It's in the core makeup of the human psyche to be tribal versus to form larger societies. So I think that's the core fear at it, because as I mentioned in my talk, power is really the thing that drives this. And when you are no longer the majority in number, you also have a harder time to maintain that power. So I would say the fear of extinction is probably the primary fear there.
Wow, thank you very much. Mujahid, same question. What is the basic fear lurking at the bottom of racism? You're on mute, Mujahid.
My fear, the fear of others who are like me or who look like me, happens to be the unconscious awareness of many Caucasian whites of the fact of this white privilege and that racism really even exists. I know numerous people who will very honestly and with the deepest degree of honesty and sincerity say, you know, well, I'm not a racist. Well, or you are anti-racist. So my fear is that we will continue to remain unconscious of it. And the unconscious drives and continues to sustain it. And because in that unconsciousness, we pass off to our children. So the racism becomes multi-generational and it's inherited. And when something is inherited in that fashion, in that form, the unconsciousness makes it very, very difficult to address because the person is unaware of it. Racism can be like breathing. We don't have to think about it. You know, racism can be like batting your eyes or any other thing that's autonomic. It's unconscious to those who in particular experience the privilege of racism. It's very unconscious because it's very comfortable. And I think the fear is that we will not be able to wake Americans up. And I think that type of situation leaves us to where not only will we be faced with a COVID-19, we're going to be faced with a lot of other issues if we don't deal with this issue of racism. Racism is the core. COVID-19 is just a spiritual dimension of racism. What most people experience from COVID-19, George Floyd was very succinct, God rest his soul. He was very succinct with it when he said, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Racism makes it like that for those who suffer from racism. You can't breathe in it. It's very stressful. It's very detrimental. It's very harmful to your health. I know myself as an African-American man, and any African-American man or any African-American knows that in America, wherever you're at socially, that's identifiable and that can be dangerous for your life. And that's a tremendous amount of stress. I think the danger of that is it could very well undermine the democracy of this nation.
Thank you, Mujahid. question goes to Mona. What do you think is at the fear lurking at the bottom of racism?
I think fear lurking at the bottom of racism is a fear of discomfort in change. I think that people who are living their lives in a position of privilege right now in America, not all of them, but some of them feel that educating themselves and taking a position that may seem contrary to maybe what their parents' position might be, or what their friends' position might be, puts them in a place of discomfort, in a place where they really feel like they have to stand up for someone who is not themselves. And so I think the idea behind it is that we have to join together in love and friendship and make lasting bonds with people of different faiths, of different race, of different nationality, because if we don't, people are not going to put out the effort to change their heart, to change their mind, to have these difficult conversations with their friends and family, to vote in accordance with their views on privilege and power. So I think it just goes back to this idea of a fear of change and a fear of discomfort.
Thank you, Mona. Will, same question.
I get to answer again?
Oh,
I'm more than happy to add to it.
Oh, I thought we started with Ken on that one.
You did.
Well, this is a question for everybody. What is the fear lurking at the basis of racism?
All right. Well, the basis.
If you go ahead.
No, I'm happy to add to it. So thank you. This is perfect. So one other thing I would certainly add to it is, in addition to the general rule of extinction, as has been suggested, financial security is another piece of it. But beyond financial security, really, it's a sense of comfort. So in today's world, particularly America, most people are okay. There's no limit in food supply. There's no limit in water. We have safety and shelter. All the basic needs, if you're looking at like a Maslow's hierarchy, are really met or could be met without much effort. I understand most people, are in that boat, but there are a lot of people that are not. Just give me some grace here. What happens is this fear that I will not be comfortable. I will not have my creature comforts. I won't have my 75-inch TV. Someone will get something from me. There's this sense of proportionality. It's not just equality, but proportionality. So how much of the pie are you giving to this person in comparison to what I'm getting? Am I putting in more effort? That's why you get the issues of people saying, well, you've got people on welfare driving Cadillacs, which is not true, by the way, in most cases, but they feel as though they are supplementing others in a way that is disproportionate. It doesn't matter about equality. They're looking at proportions. So I think that's another core fear there, is that they will be taken advantage of.
Thank you, Will. And yes, I didn't do my checks properly, so you got double time on that one. Thank you.
Double time.
Yes. Jolie, the question goes to you.
I think the fear really is, for me, it's just coming back down to the unknown, right? Is how are we able to empower people to look within themselves? How do we empower people to think differently? How do we empower people to have conversations with people that don't look like them, and to take away that fear that so many people unfortunately have? And whether it's racism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, empowering people to have conversations and to learn and to not stand idly by while they see and hear hate and bigotry, and be empowered to speak up. I think that's it's one of our greatest challenges, and I think it's some of our greatest hope.
Thank you very much, Jolie. Okay, now we will start another round of questions, and we'll start with Will. We're back to you, Will. And the question is for you, and it's just for you. Can you speak to the idea that the image of white Jesus in Western society has contributed to the idea of white supremacy?
Wow, that's a fantastic question. That's one I need an hour for, to be frank. But in short, it's what you see in front of you is what you respond to. If you imagine yourself in an open plane, just walking casually, your heart rate is moderate, you're smiling, you feel good sensations. Imagine seeing a wolf or a lion from the distance. Your heart rate increases. You begin to consider what your options are. You could certainly pause and observe and see if it continues. You could hide, you could retreat. Now imagine that after a few moments, that lion is now in front of you and you are maybe 10 meters away. So at this point, you have to either start walking backwards slowly, running away. You have to consider your options, and they're a bit different. Now imagine that lion is right at your face. Your heart rate is really high, adrenaline is pumping, and you have to fight for your life. But we are visual creatures. The way that we process our world is through the things that we see. Even those that do not have the full function of their eyes still have their senses, which provide them this picture in their mind, so to speak. So this applies to humanity as a whole. What we see determines how we live and how we react and the emotions or states that we find ourselves in. So when we see Jesus, who for the Christian faith is God, Son of God, and ultimate Savior, when we see that portrayed as a white person, that then says that white people are pure, white people are the Savior, white people have something for us that we need, versus the actual image of Jesus, which we know is Middle Eastern, olive skin, curly hair, that sort of thing. So it's not a white Jesus in reality, but because that's been what we've seen, that then carries over into the culture and media, where the celebrities are white, where the president for the first 43 presidents was white, the vice president for the first 45, white, and so on and so forth. So all of these systems and structures of power, of purity, of goodness have always been white. And when you look at Black people, or people of color, Native Americans, indigenous people, they're always treated as lesser. They're poor, they're ignorant, they're barbaric, and their lifestyles are not suitable for those of us that have any type of couth. It's that kind of thing that happens. So white Jesus is extremely problematic, and I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much. And I know where I went wrong last time. Rico, I didn't give you a chance to answer the question, I don't think, about what is the basic fear lurking at the bottom of racism. Would you like to take a stab at that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alita. I think when I think about that question, I think about xenophobia and the fear of the other. We get so caught up into they're different, they don't like the same things I like, and therefore, and even media plays a big role in how we view other groups, particularly other racial groups. And I've spoken about this with Will on his podcast, that we talk too much about toleration and not enough about celebration. And so we talk about tolerating the other, but we don't talk about celebrating the other. And so these are the types of conversations that I believe we need to move into. I can tolerate my brother Mujahid, right? But that is only saying that while I'm in his presence, I will not convey in a debate, I will not stir the pot, but I don't want to do that. I want to celebrate my brother Mujahid Ramadan, so that when he invites me to break bread with him, my answer is yes, right? Versus no, we're not from the same religion. And so for me, I think it boils down to not knowing the other, fearing of the other, and not moving into the direction of celebration versus toleration.
Thank you very much, Rico. The next question for the individual is for Mujahid. As an advisory board member to the local police department, can you tell us how they are addressing the idea of systemic racism in policing? In a minute. Sorry.
You know, and I just want to take about 5 seconds and say to the question that was asked earlier about the images of the white Jesus, the Caucasian Jesus, that probably is probably the most damaging image that you can place before 3-year-old African-American children, because they're going to believe what they see. So that becomes to them God in person at that point in time. So yes, LVMPD and its initiatives towards addressing systemic racism, it has very, very robust and a very strong program around addressing the issues of bias, bigotry, racism, and prejudice, and has had one for probably well over a decade now, and has been more sustained than probably any other corporation here in Southern Nevada. It starts at the academy level with the recruits, where recruits spend time in classes dealing with the type issues that we've talked about, dealing with blind spots, dealing with unconscious prejudice, dealing with understanding what diversity is and what the benefits of diversity is, connecting diversity to their ICARE acronym, integrity, courage, accountability, respect for people, and excellence. All of this is included in their diversity initiatives. The department also has a multicultural advisory council, which meets once a month with the sheriff and all of his entire executive staff. Now, when we talk about training, the training that we talked about has actually been throughout the entire department. So all 4,000 sworn officers, men and women, have gone through the training, and everyone who comes to the academy goes through the training, and then unconscious biases and prejudices are even followed up in further training. So it's a very extensive, robust program, and probably in the next couple of weeks you can go online. It's being redeveloped to be placed online, and you can go online and see the history and the tracking of what they've done. And I think that's what leads them to be identified across the country. That is, LVMPD is one of the leading 21st century police departments, and this was identified in President Obama's 2015 report on 21st century policing. LVMPD was the only police department mentioned as being a police department of the 21st century. So I think Sheriff Lombardo and the 3-4 other sheriffs that preceded him have been very visionary in accepting those ideas and concepts that have come from the community there.
Thank you very much, Mujahid. Mona, why do you think the Baha'i faith links the resolution of America's injustice toward Blacks with the attainment of universal peace?
Yes. So the attainment of racial unity is super duper important with the attainment of world peace. And if you think about it, it's a very direct correlation. We can't come together in this emerging era of globalization if we can't see each other as brothers and sisters. It's really as simple as that. As the world gets closer and closer, and social media becomes more accessible to people all over the world, we're able to see people living their authentic lives within their own cultures. And I think through that process, we are becoming more and more accustomed to realizing that other ways of living are not necessarily bad. They're just different and beautiful in their own ways. But with that globalization, there has to be an emphasis for everyone, not just people connected through the internet, to be able to have this burgeoning idea of racial unity on their minds, even if they're not, like I said, connected in those ways, even if they're in their small white communities in a rural town in North Dakota, or even if they are somewhere in India where they only see a white person once every year. So as technology emerges, it becomes more and more important. But we have to realize that technology is not around for everyone yet, and it's not the only way that racial unity will be achieved. And without racial unity, like I said, the planet can't see itself as one, and we can't continue to globally connect in any meaningful way without recognizing that we are all equal in the eyes of God.
Thank you, Mona. The next question is for Rico. With the exception of Native Americans, we are a nation of immigrants. Why do you think we are so quick to forget that our parents or grandparents came to this country and that we are here because they could make a life here?
Can you repeat the question one more time, Alita?
Yes. With the exception of Native Americans, we are a nation of immigrants. Why do you think we are so quick to forget that our parents or grandparents came to this country and that we are here because they could make a life here?
Well, you know, Alita, this touches on a lot of, I believe, intergenerational conversations that families should be having, particularly the conversation that I had with my mother when she came to this country. I hold that story closely to my heart, and I never allow myself to go into a space of entitlement. And so I think the way that immigrant children should be looking at their experiences is, one, they should look at themselves as first American. They are American, they're worthy of that title regardless of what other people say, right? But they can also be a Salvadorian, they can also be Mexican, they can also be Syrian American. And so I think we get caught up so much in these titles of not belonging and not wanting to belong in this country. And I think the other part for me that I want to touch on, Alita, is particularly with my mother came into this country, she took a very low paying job, and she had to deal with a lot of chemicals within her job, but never complained to higher office because at the time that was all she had to put food on the table for her children. So in a sense, she took that job and she was grateful. And so there's a sense of another shift, generational shift with children of immigrants that are saying, yes, we're grateful for being here, but at the same time, there's another sense of wanting to belong. And I'll give you a quote that Selena, a great singer, Selena, she said, "I'm not American enough for the Americans, and I'm not Mexican enough for the Mexicans." So they're in that middle of trying to figure out, where do they belong? Do I step the line too far and then let go of my nationality here? Or do I step the line too far and let go of my roots here? And so those are some of the things that children of immigrants are dealing with. And language is another piece to that conversation. But for me, I think when I think about that question, I think about what Selena said and said, I'm not American enough for both. I'm not enough for both groups. And for me, I would just say you are enough, period.
Thank you, Rico. This question is for Jolie. Could you speak to the increase in anti-Semitism in the world in the last few years?
Oh, yeah, this is, I think that we've all watched our television and we've seen, what we saw in Poway and Pittsburgh and Charlottesville. And we've seen at the ADL on our annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents that there was a 12% increase in anti-Semitism and the attitudes that are changing and increasing. But I think one of the things I really want to focus on for this panel is that anti-Semitism doesn't just affect the Jews, right? When we see anti-Semitism, when we see white supremacists, when we see white nationalists, and they're on the street saying Jews will not replace us, we cannot think that this is just about the Jews. And if we stay quiet and we think that this is just solely anti-Semitism, we're losing the point of this. It's all about the other, right? Anti-Semitism about the other, creating fears of the other, and Jews in this instance of anti-Semitism is the others. But as we see this anti-Semitism increasing around the country, it's the attitudes of hatred, bigotry that's increasing for immigrants, for Blacks, for Latinx. And anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish hatred is always just the canary in the coal mine, right? It's the litmus test of where we are as a community, as a state, as our beliefs. And so if we see the rise of anti-Semitism, do not think it's just the Jews. It affects all of us.
Thank you very much, Jolie. This question is for Ken. Ken, why do you think white religious persons are more likely to deny structural racism than those who are not religious?
I think it's, wow. The structure of the country it comes out of a connection to Christian religion, the construction of the government, a lot of the laws, the heritage in terms of the power that is exercised in this country really comes out of that tradition. And I think there's a sense of entitlement that comes with it for Christian and for as a citizen of the country as well, that it's difficult to see something negative coming out of that in terms of racism or white supremacy or looking at the other as something that's equally normative versus the norm that, like, say, I grew up with as a in a white culture, in a rural culture, that I saw similarities all the way up the hierarchy in terms of power in this country, and it was just really easy to identify my religion with that power structure. So it's hard to begin to delve into the underlying issues around that that have to do with race and supremacy and privilege. Did I touch on that question?
I think you did a good job. Thank you very much, Ken. I appreciate it. Okay, I think we're at the last round, and I'm going to give our panelists an opportunity to either answer this question or make a closing comment, perhaps something that you wished you would have said, or follow up on something that you wanted to add. So the question is, and we'll start with Mujahid on this one. What is the most important thing that individuals can do to fight systemic racism? Or your closing comment.
I believe in acknowledge that it exists. I believe acknowledgement that systemic racism exists and that it allows privileges for a certain population. But I think in closing, for our continued dialogue along the lines of bias, bigotry, racism, and prejudice, and make sure that we continue to invite more and more people around the country to engage itself in this type of discussion. In South Africa, they had the Reconciliation Committee. And Rwanda, there was a discussion group across the country. I believe even after Nazi Germany, there was many discussion groups among those of the Jew population and the German population. America is yet to come to acknowledge its own destructive nature of racism. Until we do so, then we will remain in this crippled state of being underperforming in what could be the greatest nation in the world. Now, that will require compassion, understanding, love, affection, and a great deal of patience on all of our part. It has been that way out through history. It won't change for us. So engaging each other in dialogue, but that dialogue must maintain love and compassion in it, is going to be one of the key methodologies that I believe will help sustain us and take us to the next level of a truly great democracy that represents the 21st century, what this country looks like.
Thank you, Mujahid. Mona, same question for you. What is the most important thing that individuals can do to fight systemic racism?
Absolutely. Educate yourself, educate others. It is not enough to merely listen to the media and get your news that way or get your education that way, nor is it enough to purely try to ask your Black friends or your friends of color their opinions. That's a valuable resource, but we all have a very important responsibility to seek out this education on our own. And in that, be okay with our discomfort. Be okay with the feelings that we might have about being complicit. And through those feelings, move forward and realize I can't change the past, but I can change how I react in the future. Actually, Rico said something to me the other day, and he said, racism is not a permanent state. It's a temporary state, and you can move out of it. And that really resonated with me. So I think if everyone can just view racism, even the small little things they might not realize are racist, if they can come into that vision of understanding and then move forward past the guilt and move forward into being being an active person who is creating change in our communities, we can get it done.
Thank you, Mona. And thank you, Rico, for adding to that. And Rico, so now your turn. The question is, what is the most important thing that individuals can do to fight systemic racism? Or you can give a closing comment in whatever way you'd like.
Thank you, Alita. Shout out to Mona, because that was going to be my piece right there, is to understand that racism is not a permanent thing, but a temporary structure. And I'm so glad that you took that away from the conversation that I had with you in the Baha'i community last time, Mona. But I think the definition of racism is one that we as individuals need to come to grip more closely. We tend to become extremely offended when someone says you are racist, and because we tend to think about, are you saying that I am one of those white supremacists that marched in Charlottesville? Are you saying that I put on white hoodies and part of the KKK? And so I think the way that we look at that definition needs to change. And without that change, our blinders are not coming off. And so I think when we think about racism, we need to think about it as a state of being rather than it being a definition of a person. If I say someone is being racist or saying racist things, I am acknowledging and I'm arguing that that person, while they might be a person who volunteers at their kids' soccer games and mentors young people, could still have ingrained prejudices within them that they may not know about. And so that's why it's so important to call someone in versus calling someone out in that sense. So I think looking at the definition and acknowledging that there's prejudices maybe lurking within you, and that would be my thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, Rico. Jolie.
You never want to go after Rico, right? So, but with that being said, I would say everything that everyone said today, especially in the closing, I 100% agree with, but speak up, show up, share facts, share real information, have tough conversations. We know that hate is learned, and with education can be unlearned. We know that when people are sitting around the kitchen table at night with their families and they're having these conversations, they are ingraining their children in whatever it is that they're thinking or seeing or watching on television. Learn how to have these conversations with your children. Learn how to engage them so that they feel empowered to go into the community and speak up. And when they see racism or bigotry or hate, that they know what to say. We need to give our kids toolkits. We need to give each other toolkits. We need to get ourselves toolkits on how to address systemic racism when we see it, or anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, all the isms, so that we can create an environment where we're free of hatred and bigotry. And just to go back to the education piece, it really is education, education, education. And that's the only antidote to hate. And the last thing I just want to reiterate, and I don't know if I said it earlier, is that we need to be speaking up for one another. It is not enough for only Jews to be speaking out and calling out anti-Semitism, or for the Black community to speaking out and calling out racism when they see it. It means so much more, and more people hear it, and you engage the conversation, you heighten the conversation when there's other groups standing and speaking out and calling out the racism and bigotry and anti-Semitism, and not leaving it up to the group, one group, to be the voice bringing attention to it. And so that's why I'm so thankful for the Interfaith Council, because together we stand so much stronger together, and it's one of the great honors to be a part of it in our community.
Thank you so much, Jolie. Really appreciate your comments. Ken, would you like to take the question or give a closing comment?
Maybe a little of both. I like what Mona said about resisting complacency. And that's a big one for, I think, white folks, is to become complacent about thinking that we've arrived someplace when in reality, we've only begun on a journey of discovering our own internal sense of privilege and supremacy. It goes along with, I think, the people, maybe the church saying, well, we've come a long way from being segregationists, but what we're now really maybe becoming is assimilationist, where people are welcome to come in who are different, but as long as this is the way you behave, this is what your values are when you become a part of us, rather than going to an anti-racist level of saying we're all equal and we all have a civilized, normative sort of way of looking at life with different lens, and moving towards equity in that sense. But it's uncomfortable, it's hard work. As a white person, sometimes it's easier to fall back into familiar environments, knowing that I can go anywhere in this environment, in this culture, and not be questioned on why are you here, or you don't belong. So I think it's for most of us as white folks is if we think about our own racism and if it begins to come up, know that I can't do anything about where I've been, but I can do everything about where I'm going. And so I can begin to make choices, sometimes hard choices, but make those choices and stay the course.
Thank you very much, Ken. And Will, you get the last word tonight.
Well, thank you, Alita, and thank you to everyone that has joined and sent in questions. This has been a really meaningful experience. I'm so honored to have been a part of it. To answer the question, it's simply the most important thing we can do is to accept reality. A lot of people are convinced that America is the greatest nation on the earth, when in reality, we're not even in the top 10 in a number of metrics. So getting outside of our bubble, getting to know others, engaging with people who are different from us and experience different things in different places, and recognizing that different doesn't mean less good. It simply means different. Diversity is fantastic. Our Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The word in that pursuit doesn't mean you get to chase after. It really actually means the ability to thoroughly enjoy. And so if we are to live up to this promissory note, to this ideal of our nation, then we must be anti-racist. Simply not being racist is not enough. We must be anti-racist. We must not simply stop at addressing white privilege, but we also need to look at colored disadvantage, whether that's black, brown, yellow, or red. There are disadvantages simply for being colored. So we have to address both ends of the spectrum. And then lastly, I'll say that our country, our world, is only as good as the education system that surrounds it. So as Jolie mentioned, education, education, education. And it must go beyond just simply regurgitating facts to truly embracing and accepting reality as it is, recognizing that we can shift, we can change, we can transform the world. And the key to all of this is one word: compassion.
Thank you very much, Will. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, in the world of Zoom and Facebook, we're concluding our evening's gathering. Our 33rd season has come to a close. It's in the books. So thank you all. God bless you all.